Hey guys, tonight we begin with the strange, silent, and softly flickering world of medieval beauty, and the quiet customs that once defined what it meant to be admired. The unspoken rules of attraction in every century, a whispered mirror of desire where queens, peasants, and mystics could all follow the same rituals for elegance, survival, or superstition. It wasn't just a time of castles and crusades, it was where suffering and silk, plagues and perfumes, faded tapestries and flushed cheeks all existed side by side beneath the candlelight of old stone halls. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, a soft descent into the curious world of beauty standards in the Middle Ages, and everything else they never taught you in school. In medieval Europe, the concept of beauty diverged significantly from modern ideals, embracing an aesthetic that prioritized control, pallor, and an absence of overt emotion. Unlike today's emphasis on natural looks, the medieval woman's face was indeed a canvas, meticulously crafted to conform to societal expectations. This wasn't merely a preference but a deeply ingrained cultural mandate, where specific features like a high forehead, thinly plucked or even shaved brows, and an almost translucent complexion were not considered optional but essential markers of feminine allure. The high forehead, for instance, was a highly coveted attribute. This wasn't a natural anatomical feature for most, and women went to considerable lengths to achieve it. Hairlines were often plucked, shaved, or chemically treated to recede, creating the illusion of a broader, more expansive forehead. This practice was rooted in the belief that a large forehead conveyed intelligence, nobility, and an aristocratic lineage. It also allowed for a clearer view of the delicate veins beneath the skin, further enhancing the desired paleness. The hair itself, if not hidden under veils or elaborate head coverings, was often styled to accentuate this elevated hairline, sometimes braided and coiled on top of the head or pinned back tightly. This deliberate manipulation of the hairline served to frame the face in a way that emphasized the smoothness and unblemished quality of the skin, which was another cornerstone of medieval beauty. Complementing the high forehead were the thin or entirely absent eyebrows. Again, this was a departure from natural growth patterns. Women meticulously plucked, shaved, or even bleached their eyebrows to achieve a barely there appearance. The reasoning behind this seemingly stark aesthetic choice was multifaceted. Firstly, it contributed to the overall impression of a smooth, uninterrupted canvas of the face. Bold or bushy eyebrows would have been seen as detracting from this ideal. Secondly, the lack of prominent eyebrows further accentuated the paleness of the complexion and drew attention to the eyes, which were often considered windows to the soul. A faint, almost invisible brow line created an ethereal, almost otherworldly quality, aligning with the prevalent religious and spiritual undertones of the era. This deliberate suppression of natural brow growth reinforced the notion of a woman's control over her physical appearance, a visible manifestation of inner discipline and refinement. Perhaps the most defining characteristic of medieval beauty was porcelain skin. A pale complexion was not just admired, it was practically a prerequisite. This ideal was deeply intertwined with social status. Sun-kissed skin was associated with outdoor labor and the peasantry, while a pristine, unblemished pallor signified a life of leisure, indoor pursuits, and an aristocratic lifestyle. Women went to great lengths to achieve and maintain this alabaster complexion. They avoided the sun at all costs, often wearing wide-brimmed hats, veils, and gloves even indoors. Cosmetics, though rudimentary by modern standards, were employed to enhance paleness. Lead-based paints and powders were common, despite their toxic properties, alongside flour, egg whites, and even ground pearls, all aimed at creating a flawless, almost unnaturally white surface. This emphasis on pallor also contributed to the overall impression of fragility and delicacy, qualities highly valued in medieval womanhood. Beyond individual features, the overall aesthetic aimed for an emotionless demeanor. A serene, composed, and somewhat impassive expression was considered the epitome of beauty. Laughter was often seen as unladylike, and overt displays of emotion were generally discouraged. This wasn't about suppressing genuine feelings, but about presenting a controlled and dignified outward appearance. The lack of strong facial expressions further contributed to the canvas effect, allowing the carefully constructed features to take center stage without the disruption of shifting emotions. This controlled presentation was also linked to societal expectations of female piety and humility, where a placid demeanor reflected an inner spiritual calm. In essence, medieval beauty was a performative art. It was not about enhancing natural attributes, but about transforming the face into a stylized representation of ideal womanhood. Each element, the high forehead, the thin brows, the porcelain skin, and the serene expression, contributed to a cohesive vision of beauty that was highly artificial, yet deeply meaningful within its cultural context. This controlled beauty reflected a society that valued order, hierarchy, and the subjugation of raw nature to cultivated ideals, projecting an image of refinement, status, and virtue onto the very face of its women. The medieval woman's face, therefore, was not merely a biological feature but a meticulously crafted work of art, a testament to the prevailing aesthetic and social values of the era. In medieval Europe, the complexion of one's skin was far more than a mere aesthetic preference. It was a potent visual indicator of social status, wealth, and a life of leisure. The adage, "fair skin meant you were rich," encapsulates a profound truth of the era, where a pale, unblemished complexion was the ultimate signifier of nobility and prosperity, starkly contrasting with the tanned and weathered skin of the working classes. This deep linkage between beauty and status created a powerful incentive for the elite to cultivate and maintain an alabaster pallor, turning their skin into a literal canvas of their social standing. The roots of this ideal lay firmly in the social and economic realities of medieval life. The vast majority of the population, particularly the peasantry, spent their lives engaged in demanding outdoor labor. Farmers toiled in the fields under the relentless sun, their skin naturally darkening and becoming coarsened by exposure to the elements. Artisans, laborers, and servants, even if not directly exposed to the sun all day, still led lives that often involved physical exertion and less sheltered environments. Consequently, a tanned or sun-darkened complexion became synonymous with manual labor, poverty, and a life of hardship. It was the visible mark of a person who had to work for a living, whose skin bore the evidence of their toil. Conversely, a pale complexion became the exclusive hallmark of the aristocratic and wealthy classes. These individuals lived lives of relative comfort, largely confined to their grand estates, castles, or urban residences. Their days were spent indoors, engaging in activities deemed suitable for their station. Managing estates, intellectual pursuits, social gatherings, or religious devotion. They were waited upon by servants, dressed in fine silks and luxurious fabrics, and had little need to venture into the harsh outdoor world for work. Thus, a perpetually unblemished, milky white skin tone became the irrefutable proof that one was a person of leisure, untouched by the sun's harsh rays and the rigors of manual labor. It signaled that one possessed the wealth to afford a life of indoor comfort and the retinue of servants necessary to maintain it. This ideal was not merely an unspoken understanding. It permeated medieval culture, influencing art, literature, and fashion. Portraits of noble women invariably depicted them with ethereal, almost translucent skin, often with delicate blue veins subtly visible beneath the surface, further emphasizing their delicacy and pallor. Poets eulogized fair skin as a supreme beauty, linking it to purity, innocence, and divine favor. Fashion, too, played a crucial role in maintaining and accentuating this ideal. Elaborate head coverings, veils, and wide-brimmed hats were not just fashion statements but practical tools to shield the face from the sun. Long sleeves and gloves were worn even indoors, ensuring that as much skin as possible remained untouched by the sun. The pursuit of paleness was an ardent endeavor, often involving practices that would be considered extreme or even dangerous by modern standards. Noble women went to great lengths to achieve the desired complexion. Avoiding the sun was paramount. When outdoor excursions were unavoidable, They would carry parasols or wear heavy veils to protect their faces. Cosmetics, rudimentary as they were widely employed. Lead-based white paints and powders were common, despite the known toxicity of lead, which could cause skin irritation, hair loss, and even more severe health problems. Other ingredients included ground chalk, flour, egg whites, and even powdered pearls, all mixed into pastes or applied as dry powders to create a flawless, luminous white surface. These concoctions were often thick and opaque, designed not just to lighten the skin but to mask any imperfections, creating an artificial, porcelain-like finish. The constant effort and expense required to maintain such a complexion further underscored its link to wealth. Only those with significant resources could afford the time to avoid sun exposure, the servants to assist them, and the expensive and often imported cosmetic ingredients. A woman with naturally darker or easily tanned skin would find it exceptionally challenging, if not impossible, to conform to this beauty standard without significant resources for extensive bleaching treatments or heavy makeup application. The social ramifications of skin tone were profound. A woman's marriage prospects could be significantly influenced by her complexion. A pale bride was considered more desirable, as her skin served as a silent testament to her family's wealth and her own refined upbringing. Conversely, a woman with a visibly tanned complexion might face judgment or be perceived as less suitable for a high-status marriage, regardless of other qualities. This emphasis on external appearance reinforced the rigid social hierarchy of the time, where physical attributes became outward markers of one's place in society. In essence, fair skin in medieval Europe was more than just a fleeting trend. It was a deeply ingrained cultural value that reflected the economic, social, and class divisions of the era. It was a tangible symbol of privilege, leisure, and purity, setting the wealthy apart from the working masses. The lengths to which noblewomen went to achieve and maintain this ideal speak volumes about the power of beauty standards to shape behavior and reinforce societal norms. The skin became a literal badge of honor, a silent declaration that one belonged to the elite, living a life of comfort, surrounded by silk and servants, far removed from the toil and sun-drenched fields of the common folk. This connection between skin tone and status was a fundamental aspect of medieval identity, enduring for centuries as a testament to the complex interplay between aesthetics, wealth, and social standing. In the often surprising world of medieval beauty standards, where artifice reigns supreme over natural aesthetics, few practices are as striking, or indeed as peculiar, as the use of mouse fur to create fashionable false eyebrows. This seemingly bizarre trend perfectly encapsulates the era's obsession with transforming the human face into a meticulously crafted canvas, where natural features were often altered, suppressed, or entirely replaced to conform to the prevailing ideals. The notion that eyebrows, made of mouse skin, was a reality underscores a fascinating aspect of medieval beauty. The more unconventional, and perhaps even uncomfortable, the method, the more fashionable it might be considered. The genesis of this peculiar trend lies in the prevailing ideal of eyebrow aesthetics in medieval Europe. Unlike many modern beauty trends that favor fuller, more defined brows, the medieval preference leaned heavily towards thin, almost invisible, or entirely absent eyebrows. This was not merely a subtle shaping. Women often went to extreme lengths to achieve this look, meticulously plucking, shaving, or even bleaching their natural brows into near oblivion. The reasons for this extreme reduction were multifaceted. Firstly, it contributed to the highly prized high forehead, creating an uninterrupted expanse of pale skin above the eyes. Secondly, it emphasized the overall canvas effect of the face, allowing other carefully crafted features, such as the porcelain complexion and serene expression, to take prominence. Bold or natural eyebrows would have been seen as distracting or even crude, disrupting the delicate and refined aesthetic. However, the complete removal of eyebrows, while fashionable, could also present its own challenges. Accidents in plucking, uneven growth, or simply the desire for a perfectly symmetrical and consistent look led some to seek artificial enhancements. Enter the humble mouse. In a time before modern synthetic materials, natural animal products were a readily available resource. The fine, soft fur of a mouse, when carefully harvested, proved surprisingly suitable for creating delicate, almost hair-like strips that could mimic the desired thin brow line. The process, while not extensively documented in step-by-step guides from the period, likely involved carefully skinning a mouse, preserving the delicate skin with its fine fur, and then meticulously cutting it into thin strips shaped like the desired eyebrow arch. These strips would then be affixed to the brow bone. How they were attached is a matter of some speculation, but common adhesives of the time, such as tree sap, glues made from animal products like gelatin or hide glue, or even egg whites, could have been employed. The application would have required considerable skill and patience to ensure a natural-looking, or rather, unnaturally thin and perfect-looking, result. The very act of using mouse fur speaks volumes about the medieval approach to beauty. It highlights a pragmatic, resourceful, and somewhat extreme mentality. If a natural feature didn't conform to the ideal, it was to be altered, and if it couldn't be altered sufficiently, it was to be replaced, even with something as unconventional as rodent pelts. This wasn't about enhancing natural beauty, but about creating a sculpted, idealized version of the human face that conformed to specific societal notions of refinement and status. Furthermore, the stranger, the better aspect alluded to in the prompt is crucial. In an era where extreme artifice was admired, the sheer effort and unusual nature of using mouse fur for eyebrows might have added to its allure. It showcased dedication to the beauty ideal, a willingness to go beyond conventional methods, and perhaps even a hint of daring. It set those who employed such methods apart, signaling their deep commitment to fashion and their adherence to aristocratic norms. After all, only those with the resources and the societal connections to acquire such unusual beauty accessories would likely engage in this practice. Beyond the aesthetic, the use of mouse fur also subtly reinforces the disconnect between medieval beauty standards and the natural world. While modern beauty often seeks to enhance what is already present, medieval beauty frequently sought to transcend or even deny nature. The high forehead achieved by plucking the hairline, the pale skin maintained by avoiding the sun, and now the thin, artificial eyebrows created from animal fur all point to a deliberate departure from the organic. This could be linked to broader philosophical and religious ideas of the time, where the human body, in its raw form, was sometimes seen as imperfect or in need of refinement and elevation through human intervention and artifice. While the practice of using mouse fur for eyebrows might seem grotesque or amusing to modern sensibilities, it serves as a powerful reminder of the fluidity of beauty standards across different historical periods. What was considered chic and sophisticated then might be deemed outlandish now, and vice versa. It highlights the lengths to which individuals, particularly women, have gone throughout history to conform to the prevailing ideals of attractiveness, often at considerable effort, expense, and even discomfort. In conclusion, the seemingly incredible notion of eyebrows, made of mouse skin, was indeed a reality for some fashionable women in medieval Europe. This practice was a direct consequence of the era's unique beauty ideals, which prioritized thin, almost invisible brows to complement high foreheads and pale complexions. Far from being a mere anecdote, it vividly illustrates the deep commitment to artifice, the resourceful and sometimes extreme methods employed, and the strong link between beauty and social status during that period. It stands as a testament to an era where the human face was truly a canvas, and no material, however unconventional, was too strange to be considered in the pursuit of the ultimate fashionable ideal. In medieval Europe, the pursuit of beauty was often intertwined with a willingness to endure discomfort and sometimes outright pain. The adage "no pain, no beauty" resonated deeply, especially when it came to achieving the highly coveted feature of a tall, expansive forehead. This wasn't merely a subtle enhancement. It was a deliberate and often arduous process of altering one's natural hairline, a testament to the belief that a high forehead was not just aesthetically pleasing but also a visual marker of intelligence, nobility, and an elevated social status. The ideal of a tall forehead stemmed from a confluence of cultural beliefs. A broad, smooth expanse of skin above the eyes was associated with a dignified and intellectual appearance. It was believed to signify wisdom, a keen mind, and an aristocratic lineage, setting the bearer apart from the common folk whose lives of manual labor might leave their features more rugged or less refined. Furthermore, the high forehead contributed to the overall impression of a serene and unblemished canvas of the face, a desired aesthetic where the features were carefully sculpted rather than left to their natural state. To achieve this coveted look, women employed various methods, many of which were undoubtedly painful and certainly required consistent effort. The most common practice was the plucking or shaving back of the hairline. Using tweezers, often made of metal or rudimentary razors, women would systematically remove the hair from their foreheads, pushing their natural hairline several inches further back than it would naturally grow. This was a continuous process, as hair regrowth necessitated frequent maintenance, meaning the discomfort was not a one-time event but a recurring ordeal. Plucking, even with modern sharp tweezers, can be an uncomfortable experience, causing stinging, redness, and irritation. Imagine this process performed with less precise, perhaps duller medieval tools, and without the benefit of modern skincare to soothe the inflamed skin afterwards. Shaving, while seemingly less painful initially, could lead to razor burn, nicks, and ingrown hairs, all of which would have been uncomfortable and potentially prone to infection in an era with limited antiseptic knowledge. Beyond manual removal, some sources suggest the use of depilatory creams or pastes, though details on their composition are sparse. These would have likely contained caustic ingredients designed to dissolve hair, which could cause chemical burns, skin irritation, and allergic reactions. The exact formulations are largely lost to history, but the principle would have been to achieve hair removal through harsh means, implying further potential for pain and skin damage. The discomfort endured for the high forehead extended beyond the act of hair removal itself. The exposed skin of the newly enlarged forehead would have been more susceptible to the elements, requiring constant protection to maintain the desired paleness. This meant wearing veils, elaborate head coverings, or wide-brimmed hats, even indoors, which could be cumbersome and restrictive. The constant vigilance against sun exposure added another layer of inconvenience to the pursuit of this beauty standard. The emphasis on this particular feature also influenced hairstyles. Hair, if not entirely hidden, was often styled to accentuate the high forehead. It might be braided and coiled tightly on top of the head, or pulled back severely, ensuring that not a single strand fell across the prized expansive forehead. These tight styles could lead to headaches, scalp irritation, and even hair loss over time, adding to the list of physical tolls taken in the name of beauty. The willingness to endure such pain highlights the powerful social pressures and cultural values at play. For medieval women of the upper classes, conforming to these beauty standards was not merely about personal vanity. It was about presenting oneself as a member of the elite, affirming one's status, and enhancing one's marriage prospects. A woman who possessed the intelligent and noble forehead was seen as more desirable, more refined, and more fitting for a high-status match. The pain, therefore, was a small price to pay for the significant social dividends it promised. Furthermore, the pain could be seen as a form of self-discipline, a demonstration of one's commitment to the ideals of beauty and refinement. In a society where physical hardship was a common part of life for many, the voluntary endurance of discomfort for aesthetic purposes might have been viewed as a mark of fortitude and dedication, elevating the individual above those who simply let nature take its course. It underscored the notion that beauty was not a gift, but an achievement, earned through conscious effort and a willingness to suffer for the ideal. In conclusion, the practice of plucking or shaving back hairlines to achieve a tall forehead in medieval Europe vividly illustrates that pain was part of beauty ethos of the time. This was not a subtle cosmetic tweak but a significant physical alteration, demanding consistent and often painful maintenance. The high forehead, signifying intelligence and nobility, was a cornerstone of medieval beauty, and women were prepared to endure considerable discomfort to attain it. This enduring commitment to an aesthetic ideal, even at the cost of pain, serves as a powerful reminder of how deeply intertwined beauty, status, and suffering could be in the pursuit of perfection in historical contexts. In medieval Europe, the pursuit of an ethereal, almost ghostly pallor was a cornerstone of feminine beauty, deeply entwined with notions of wealth, leisure, and purity. To achieve this highly desired porcelain complexion, women of means turned to a range of cosmetic products, many of which contained ingredients now known to be dangerously toxic. Among the most prevalent and perilous was lead-based powder, a substance that promised a radiant, flawless glow but delivered a slow, insidious poison to its unsuspecting users. The grim reality was that deadly makeup was normal, with women inadvertently sacrificing their health and even their lives in the name of beauty. The ideal of pale skin was not merely an aesthetic whim, it was a potent social signifier. A lack of sun exposure indicated a life lived indoors, free from the arduous labor of the fields or the exposure of outdoor commerce. It spoke of inherited wealth, silk garments, and a retinue of servants, a visible declaration of one's aristocratic status. To be tanned or weather-beaten was to be associated with the peasantry and a life of hardship, a distinction the elite were keen to avoid. Thus, achieving and maintaining an alabaster complexion became a fervent, almost desperate, endeavor. Among the various concoctions used to whiten the skin, lead-based powders, such as Venetian ceruse, also known as Blanc de Ceruse de Venise or spirits of Saturn, were highly prized. These powders, made from white lead, basic lead carbonate, mixed with substances like vinegar or water, offered an unparalleled opacity and smoothness. Unlike other natural whitening agents like flour or egg whites, lead-based products provided a superior, long-lasting coverage that could effectively mask blemishes, uneven skin tone, and the subtle imperfections that even the wealthiest individuals might possess. When applied, they created a startlingly white, almost luminous finish that was considered the epitome of beauty. However, the very properties that made lead-based makeup so effective also made it deadly. Lead is a heavy metal, and when applied to the skin, it can be absorbed into the bloodstream. While the rate and extent of absorption could vary depending on the specific formulation and individual skin integrity, prolonged and consistent use inevitably led to lead poisoning, a condition with a devastating array of symptoms. Initially, the effects might have been subtle, mistaken for general malaise or other ailments. Users might have experienced headaches, fatigue, and digestive issues like constipation or abdominal pain. As the lead accumulated in the body, the symptoms would escalate. The skin itself, ironically, would begin to suffer. Chronic lead exposure could lead to a grayish pallor, further exacerbating the desire for more makeup to cover the new discoloration. It could also cause skin lesions, ulcers, and premature aging, creating a vicious cycle where more toxic makeup was applied to conceal the damage wrought by previous applications. Beyond the skin, the neurological effects of lead poisoning were particularly insidious. Victims could suffer from tremors, muscle weakness, and paralysis. Cognitive decline, memory loss, and mood disturbances, including irritability, depression, and even madness, were common. This could have had profound impacts on the lives of noblewomen, affecting their ability to manage their households, participate in courtly life, and maintain their social standing. In severe cases, the lead would attack the nervous system, leading to convulsions, coma, and ultimately, death. Hair loss, particularly of the eyebrows and hairline, which were already meticulously plucked or shaved to achieve the desired high forehead, was another distressing side effect. Gums could become swollen and inflamed, often developing a distinctive blue line known as lead line, a clear indicator of heavy metal poisoning. Reproductive health was also severely impacted, with lead exposure contributing to infertility, miscarriages, and stillbirths. The tragic irony was that many women continued to use these deadly cosmetics, often unaware of the direct link between their beauty regimen and their deteriorating health. Medical knowledge of the time was rudimentary, and the slow, cumulative nature of lead poisoning made it difficult to attribute the symptoms directly to the makeup. Various illnesses and humors were blamed, while the toxic substances applied daily remained a seemingly innocuous part of their beauty routine. Even when some physicians began to suspect a connection, the allure of the beauty ideal, coupled with societal pressure, often outweighed any warnings. Queen Elizabeth I, for example, is famously believed to have suffered from lead poisoning due to her extensive use of Venetian ceruse, which she used to cover smallpox scars and maintain her iconic pale visage. The removal of these heavy, lead-based paints also posed challenges. Harsh, abrasive cleansers, sometimes containing equally toxic substances like mercury or ammonia, were used, further damaging the skin and potentially introducing more poisons into the body. The cycle of application, damage, and further application was a slow march towards ill health and often premature death. In conclusion, the widespread use of lead-based makeup in medieval Europe stands as a stark reminder that beauty standards, when pursued without scientific understanding, can be truly lethal. The desire for a pale, ghostly glow led women to embrace cosmetics that slowly but surely poisoned their bodies. What appeared to be the epitome of beauty and status was, in reality, a silent killer, transforming its users from radiant figures into victims of their own vanity. The normalcy of deadly makeup in this era underscores a chilling historical truth. For countless women, looking beautiful literally meant risking their lives. In medieval Europe, the concept of personal hygiene differed vastly from modern practices, leading to a stark reality. Bathing was rare, perfume was not. Far from being a luxury or a routine, full-body bathing, especially with hot water and soap, was an infrequent occurrence for most people, even among the wealthy. This scarcity of bathing created a pervasive issue of body odor, which was then creatively and often heavily masked by the widespread use of potent perfumes and aromatic substances. The reasons behind the rarity of bathing were complex and multifaceted. Firstly, logistical challenges were significant. Heating large quantities of water for a bath was an arduous and expensive endeavor, requiring considerable amounts of firewood and labor. For the average household, this was simply not feasible on a daily or even weekly basis. Even for the nobility, grand bathhouses were more common in earlier Roman times, with medieval facilities being less widespread or falling into disrepair. Secondly, prevailing medical beliefs often discouraged frequent bathing. Many physicians believed that hot water opened the pores, making the body vulnerable to diseases and bad airs, miasma. This fear of contagion, though misguided, contributed to the avoidance of regular washing. Lastly, religious sentiments sometimes played a role, with some ascetic interpretations viewing excessive focus on the body as vain or sinful, though this was not a universal doctrine. Given the infrequent bathing, body odor was an inescapable reality of medieval life. People, regardless of their social standing, would have carried a discernible scent. While modern sensibilities might recoil at this thought, it was simply part of the olfactory landscape of the time. However, this did not mean people were oblivious to or content with unpleasant smells. Instead, they developed sophisticated strategies to combat and cover up body odor, with perfume becoming an essential component of personal presentation and social interaction. Perfumes in medieval Europe were a far cry from the subtle, nuanced fragrances of today. They were designed to be potent, long-lasting, and capable of overpowering existing smells. The raw materials used were largely natural, derived from plants and animals, and often quite precious. Rosewater was perhaps one of the most common and versatile aromatic substances. Distilled from rose petals, it was prized not only for its delicate and pleasant scent but also for its perceived medicinal and cleansing properties. Rosewater was used to rinse hands and faces, to freshen garments, and sometimes even consumed or applied directly to the skin. Its ubiquity made it a staple in both aristocratic and more modest households. Herbs played a crucial role in medieval perfumery. Aromatic herbs like lavender, rosemary, thyme, sage, and mint were widely cultivated and used for their strong, refreshing scents. These herbs were often bundled into sachets or pomanders, perforated containers often filled with aromatic substances, and worn on the person, tucked into clothing, or placed in rooms to dispel stale air. Dried herbs were also strewn on floors, particularly in great halls, where their scent would be released as people walked over them. Essential oils, extracted from these herbs through rudimentary distillation or infusion in oil, would have been applied to the skin or clothing. Beyond individual herbs, complex blends were created to produce more sophisticated fragrances. Spices, often imported and highly valuable, also contributed to the medieval perfume palette. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and frankincense were not just culinary ingredients but powerful aromatics used in various forms to mask odors. Resins like frankincense and myrrh, traditionally used in religious ceremonies, also found their way into personal perfumery due to their strong, distinctive scents. Perhaps one of the more unusual and intriguing methods of perfuming was the use of scented wine. While not a direct body perfume in the modern sense, wine infused with herbs, spices, and sometimes even flowers could be used as a mouthwash, to rinse hands, or as a general aromatic wash for the face or hair. The alcohol in the wine would have acted as a solvent for the scents, and its quick evaporation would have left behind a pleasing aroma. This practice highlights the ingenuity of the era in utilizing available resources to combat odor. The use of perfumes extended beyond the individual to their immediate environment. Homes and clothing were also heavily scented. Linen would be infused with aromatic waters or dried herbs, and clothes might be aired over smoking incense or treated with perfumed powders. This comprehensive approach to scent management underscores the pervasive nature of body odor in a world without regular bathing and the elaborate lengths to which people went to create a more pleasant olfactory experience. In conclusion, the medieval reality that bathing was rare, perfume was not, paints a vivid picture of a society that adapted its hygiene practices to its logistical, medical, and social constraints. The infrequent full-body bath led to an inescapable issue of body odor, which was tackled not through washing, but through a sophisticated and extensive use of perfumes. From the refreshing simplicity of rosewater to the potent complexity of herbal blends and even scented wines, medieval people utilized every available aromatic resource to create a more pleasant personal and environmental scent. This constant struggle against natural odors shaped daily life and offers a unique insight into the ingenuity and sensory world of medieval Europe. In medieval Europe, the ability to behold one's own reflection was far from a universal experience. The statement, "mirrors were a luxury," succinctly captures a significant truth about the era. The vast majority of people lived their entire lives with limited, if any, access to a clear, undistorted image of themselves. Only the wealthiest elite could afford true mirrors, typically made of polished metal or, later, rudimentary glass. For the poor and even the middling classes, self-perception was a fragmented, indirect process, often relying on crude reflections or, more significantly, someone else's opinion. This profound lack of self-reflection meant that personal beauty was, in many ways, imagined, constructed through social feedback and prevailing ideals rather than a direct visual assessment. The technology for producing clear, reflective surfaces was nascent and expensive in the Middle Ages. Early mirrors were typically made from highly polished metals such as bronze, silver, or even steel. While these could offer a somewhat clear reflection, they were prone to tarnishing, easily scratched, and their reflectivity was never as sharp or true as modern glass mirrors. The process of polishing metal to such a high degree was labor-intensive and required skilled artisans, making the finished product a costly commodity. Later in the medieval period, some advancements were made in glass mirrors, often made by backing a piece of glass with a thin layer of lead or tin, but these were even more fragile and prohibitively expensive, reserved for the very apex of society. For the vast majority of the population, these luxuries were entirely out of reach. The poor, the peasantry, and even many townspeople would have had to make do with highly imperfect alternatives. A still pool of water might offer a fleeting, distorted image. A highly polished basin or the surface of a metal spoon might provide a vague outline. Even then, such reflections would be unclear, often warped, and highly dependent on lighting conditions. They certainly wouldn't allow for the detailed scrutiny of facial features, hair, or complexion that we take for granted today. This scarcity of direct visual feedback had profound implications for how beauty was perceived and pursued. Without the constant ability to check and adjust their appearance, individuals had to rely on other forms of information. Someone else's opinion became an incredibly powerful arbiter of beauty. Compliments, criticisms, or even subtle gestures from others would have served as primary feedback loops. A woman might know she was considered beautiful because she received admiring glances, or because a suitor expressed his appreciation for her features, or because her family members told her she possessed desirable traits. Conversely, a lack of such affirmations would indicate the opposite. This reliance on external validation meant that medieval beauty was heavily socialized. It wasn't about an individual's personal assessment or preference, but about conformity to communal ideals. If a high forehead, thin brows, and pale skin were deemed beautiful by the society, then an individual would strive to embody these traits, often without ever truly seeing the precise outcome of their efforts in a mirror. They would trust that by plucking their hairline, applying whitening powders, and adopting a serene expression, they were indeed becoming beautiful in the eyes of their community. The concept of imagined beauty also extended to the internal perception. Without a precise visual reference, an individual's mental image of themselves might be heavily influenced by how they were told they looked, or by the idealized images prevalent in art and literature. A noblewoman, despite never seeing her perfectly pale complexion with the clarity of a modern mirror, would nonetheless internalize the societal praise for paleness and believe herself to be perfectly fair, because that was the desired and affirmed state. Furthermore, the absence of mirrors might have fostered a different kind of self-awareness. Instead of focusing on minute visual details, people might have paid more attention to other sensory inputs related to their appearance. The feel of their skin, the texture of their hair, the drape of their clothing, and, crucially, the scent they exuded. Their understanding of their look would have been more holistic and less visually obsessed. The luxury status of mirrors also meant that they were potent symbols of wealth and vanity. Possessing a mirror was not just about self-adornment, it was a display of affluence. In art and literature, mirrors sometimes appeared in allegorical contexts, often associated with vanity or the fleeting nature of beauty, reflecting a moralistic perspective on self-admiration. In conclusion, the fact that mirrors were a luxury fundamentally shaped the experience of beauty in medieval Europe. It created a world where self-perception was largely indirect, mediated by the reflections of others and the prevailing social ideals. For the vast majority, personal beauty was less about a precise visual reality and more about an imagined state, built upon social feedback, cultural norms, and a collective understanding of what constituted attractiveness. This scarcity of direct self-reflection profoundly influenced how individuals understood, pursued, and valued their own appearance, making medieval beauty a truly communal and often conceptual phenomenon rather than a strictly visual one. In medieval Europe, where visual mirrors were a luxury and self-perception was often indirect, the power of words, particularly in the form of compliments and declarations of admiration, became an essential mirror reflecting a woman's beauty. Love letters were poetic beauty reviews perfectly encapsulates this phenomenon, where men's descriptions of women's allure were not merely observational but deeply lyrical, emotional, and often dramatically hyperbolic. This wasn't just about flattery. It was a culturally ingrained practice that served to articulate, affirm, and even construct beauty within the courtly love tradition. The medieval period, particularly from the 11th to the 14th centuries, saw the flourishing of courtly love, a highly stylized and often unrequited form of devotion, typically between a knight or noble and a married lady of high status. Central to this tradition was the eloquent expression of admiration, and a significant portion of this revolved around praising the lady's physical beauty. Unlike modern, often direct and concise compliments, medieval beauty reviews were drawn out, rich in metaphor, and designed to evoke profound emotion and intellectual appreciation. Consider the example, "Her cheeks, like soft petals." This seemingly simple line is a microcosm of medieval poetic sensibility. It doesn't just state that her cheeks are soft, it elevates them to the ephemeral beauty of a flower, suggesting delicacy, freshness, and a transient perfection. The soft petals evoke not just touch but also a visual of delicate color and a hint of vulnerability. This kind of simile was common, drawing parallels between the beloved's features and idealized natural elements, jewels, or precious materials. Similarly, her eyes, a reflection of twilight, goes far beyond a simple observation of eye color. Twilight itself is a liminal, magical time, imbued with mystery, shifting light, and a romantic melancholy. To compare a woman's eyes to this phenomenon suggests depth, allure, and perhaps even a hint of the divine or supernatural. It speaks to an inner quality as much as an outward appearance, hinting at the soul reflected within those captivating depths. Such descriptions were designed to be evocative, painting a picture not just of physical attributes but of the emotional and spiritual impact of the lady's beauty on the admirer. The language used in these poetic beauty reviews was rarely direct or casual. It was highly formalized, adhering to established poetic conventions and rhetorical flourishes. Troubadours, poets, and knights in their letters and songs would employ elaborate similes, extended metaphors, and classical allusions. They would describe hair as spun gold or raven's wing, lips as coral or ruby, teeth as pearls, and skin as alabaster or snow. Each comparison was carefully chosen to align with the idealized beauty standards of the time: paleness, small red lips, bright eyes, and often fair hair. The slow, emotional, and often dramatic nature of these compliments was integral to their function within courtly love. They were not quick, passing remarks but carefully crafted declarations, often intended to be read aloud or sung. The act of composing such a letter or poem was a demonstration of the suitor's devotion, his intellectual prowess, and his understanding of the sophisticated language of love. The recipient, in turn, would appreciate not only the praise but also the effort and artistry involved in its creation. This dramatic and emotional language served several purposes. Firstly, it elevated the beloved woman to an almost mythical status, placing her on a pedestal as an object of unattainable perfection. This heightened sense of reverence was a core tenet of courtly love. Secondly, it provided a rich tapestry of verbal imagery in an era where visual representations of beauty were less ubiquitous. For women who rarely saw their own full reflection, these poetic descriptions offered a powerful, if indirect, form of validation and self-understanding. They literally painted a picture of how they were seen and valued in the eyes of their admirer and, by extension, their society. Thirdly, the dramatic nature of the compliments reinforced the emotional intensity of the courtly love experience itself. While often platonic and focused on spiritual ratherness than physical consummation, the emotions expressed were profound and passionate. The language of beauty mirrored this intensity, creating an emotional landscape where feelings were grand and eloquently articulated. Finally, these poetic reviews functioned as a form of social currency. A man's ability to craft such elegant praise reflected well on his own refinement and courtly education. A woman who was the subject of such lavish poetic tributes gained status and renown within her social circle, as it signified her desirability and the depth of her admirers' affections. The compliments were not just personal expressions but public affirmations of value within the tightly knit aristocratic society. In essence, medieval love letters were far more than simple expressions of affection. They were elaborate, poetic beauty reviews that constructed and celebrated the physical and spiritual allure of women. Through lyrical comparisons and dramatic declarations, men articulated a vision of beauty that was simultaneously idealized, emotional, and deeply intertwined with the social and cultural norms of the courtly love tradition. In a world where mirrors were rare, these poetic tributes served as powerful reflections, shaping perceptions of beauty and affirming a woman's place within the intricate dance of medieval romance. While medieval beauty standards are often discussed in the context of women, it's crucial to recognize that men had beauty standards too, and these were just as intricately linked to social status, wealth, and the prevailing ideals of masculinity for the elite. Far from being exempt from the elaborate rituals of personal presentation, aristocratic men actively cultivated a specific aesthetic that clearly distinguished them from the working classes. Their appearance, from their clothing to their hair and skin, was a carefully constructed display meant to broadcast their leisure, power, and refinement. The notion that long hair and clean skin meant you weren't a laborer, you were elite, perfectly encapsulates this distinction. For the vast majority of men, a life of physical toil, whether in the fields, at a forge, or on a construction site, left its indelible marks. Skin would be tanned, calloused, and often rough from exposure to sun, wind, and manual labor. Hair, if not shorn short for practicality, would be unruly, dusty, and lacking the luster associated with careful grooming. Thus, the deliberate cultivation of long, well-kept hair and unblemished, clean skin became immediate visual cues of a life free from such rigors, a life of ease and intellectual pursuits. Long hair, often flowing or carefully styled, was a common feature among noblemen throughout much of the Middle Ages. This was a direct contrast to the shorter, more practical hairstyles of peasants and soldiers. The ability to grow and maintain long hair signified that one did not engage in activities where it would be a hindrance or get dirty. It spoke of personal attendants who could wash, comb, and style it, perhaps even anoint it with fragrant oils. The hair would often be kept clean, soft, and sometimes even perfumed, further differentiating it from the practical, utilitarian styles of the working class. Clean, soft hands were another significant marker of elite status. A man's hands were perhaps the most immediate indicator of his profession. Calloused, rough, and dirty hands were the unmistakable sign of a laborer. Conversely, smooth, unblemished, and well-maintained hands signaled that their owner engaged in activities that required no manual strain. Handling documents, wielding a sword, often a symbol of rank rather than daily labor, or managing estates from afar. This emphasis on soft hands sometimes meant that noblemen might avoid certain practical tasks or wear gloves even when not strictly necessary, simply to preserve the delicate state of their skin. Beyond these physical attributes, the attire of medieval noblemen was a critical component of their beauty standards. Men wore velvet robes, is a precise detail that speaks volumes. Velvet, a luxurious and expensive fabric, was not accessible to the common person. Its soft texture, rich sheen, and deep colors required complex weaving techniques and often costly dyes. Donning a velvet robe was an undeniable declaration of wealth, taste, and social standing. Such garments were not designed for practical work but for display, comfort, and to emphasize the wearer's graceful movements. They were often adorned with elaborate embroidery, furs, and precious jewels, further amplifying their wearer's elite status. The use of perfumes extended to men as well, and perfumed their beards highlights a specific and telling practice. Beards were fashionable for men during many periods of the Middle Ages, and like hair, they were carefully groomed. A perfumed beard would have been a strong aromatic statement, serving multiple purposes. Firstly, similar to women's perfumes, it masked body odors in an era of infrequent bathing, ensuring a more pleasant presence in close quarters. Secondly, the use of expensive and exotic perfumes underscored the wearer's wealth and access to luxury goods, many of which were imported. Thirdly, it contributed to the overall aura of refinement and personal care that was expected of an elite man. The scent would linger, leaving an impression and marking the wearer as someone of distinction. The broader implication of these male beauty standards was the clear delineation between the nobility and the common folk. Every aspect of an elite man's appearance was designed to contrast with the signs of labor and poverty. His smooth hands, clean and long hair, luxurious clothing, and refined scent all served as a powerful, non-verbal language, communicating his privileged position within the rigid medieval social hierarchy. These were not just personal preferences but deeply ingrained cultural norms that reinforced the existing class structure. In conclusion, medieval men were very much subject to specific beauty standards, particularly those of the aristocratic class. Their appearance was a deliberate performance of their status, contrasting sharply with the visible signs of manual labor. From their flowing, clean hair and soft hands to their opulent velvet robes and perfumed beards, every detail served to declare their elite standing, their wealth, and their freedom from toil. For medieval noblemen, beauty was not merely an aesthetic choice. It was a powerful social tool, a lived manifestation of their power and privilege. In the volatile social landscape of medieval Europe, where superstition, religious fervor, and societal anxieties often intersected, exceptional beauty could sometimes become a perilous burden for a woman. The chilling notion that too beautiful may be a witch reflects a dark undercurrent of fear and suspicion that could engulf those who deviated too far from the norm, even in the realm of appearance. If a woman's beauty transcended conventional understanding, if it seemed to possess an unnatural or inexplicable quality, it could trigger alarm, leading to accusations of witchcraft. When people couldn't comprehend or explain a remarkable trait, they often resorted to fear, and in the medieval mind, fear frequently led to charges of the demonic. The medieval period, particularly the later Middle Ages and the early modern period, was marked by an increasing fear of witchcraft. This fear was fueled by theological teachings, local folklore, natural disasters, and social tensions. Accusations of witchcraft were often directed at marginalized individuals, social outcasts, or those who challenged community norms. However, even those who seemed to possess admirable qualities could fall under suspicion if those qualities were perceived as extraordinary or inexplicable. Beauty, when perceived as too much or unnatural, could easily fit this dangerous category. What constituted too beautiful was subjective, but generally referred to a woman whose allure seemed to transcend human explanation. This might include unblemished perfection. While pale skin was desired, an absolutely flawless glowing complexion, especially if maintained despite harsh living conditions, might be seen as unnaturally preserved. Unusual charisma. A woman with an exceptionally captivating gaze, a compelling presence, or an ability to charm others effortlessly might be seen as possessing an unnatural influence, perhaps through magical means. Irresistible allure. If a woman seemed to attract men or exert an inexplicable power over them, it could be attributed to enchantment rather than natural charm, especially if she was perceived as defying social expectations or rejecting advances. Deviance from norm. While specific beauty standards existed, like the high forehead or pale skin, an extreme or uncanny perfection, or a beauty that was simply other in a way people couldn't categorize, could be viewed with suspicion. For instance, a woman whose beauty seemed to defy the natural aging process might raise eyebrows. The logic behind such accusations was rooted in a pre-scientific worldview that attributed unexplained phenomena to supernatural forces. If a woman's beauty was so profound that it seemed beyond the natural gifts bestowed by God, then the only other explanation, in the eyes of a fearful and superstitious community, was that it must come from an unholy source, specifically, from a pact with the devil. The devil was believed to grant witches powers, including the ability to charm, deceive, and manipulate others, and extraordinary beauty could be seen as one such diabolical gift. Accusations could arise from various sources. Envy and jealousy. A woman who was significantly more beautiful or attracted more attention than her peers could easily become the target of envy, leading to malicious whispers and accusations. Rejected suitors. A man whose advances were spurned by a particularly beautiful woman might, out of anger and frustration, accuse her of witchcraft, suggesting she used unholy means to resist him or to entice others. Societal anxiety. In times of hardship, plague, or social unrest, communities often sought scapegoats. A woman whose striking beauty set her apart could become an easy target, her unnatural allure providing a convenient explanation for inexplicable misfortunes. Religious zeal. Extremely pious individuals or zealous clergy might interpret unusual beauty as a temptation, a demonic snare designed to lead men astray, thus associating it with evil. The consequences of such accusations were dire. Once labeled a witch, a woman could face ostracism, public humiliation, torture, and ultimately, execution, often by burning or hanging. The burden of proof was often non-existent, relying on hearsay, spectral evidence, visions of the accused harming others, or confessions extracted under duress. The very features that made her beautiful could be twisted into evidence against her. Her captivating eyes might be seen as tools for casting spells, her charming voice for uttering incantations, her flawless skin for hiding the devil's mark. The tragic irony was that the very qualities society admired, extreme beauty, could become her undoing. It highlighted a deep-seated paradox in medieval thought. While beauty was celebrated as a divine gift and a sign of nobility, when it exceeded conventional boundaries or seemed inexplicable, it could morph into a sign of something sinister. It underscores how fragile a woman's position could be, her fate often at the mercy of superstition, fear, and the interpretations of a suspicious community. In conclusion, the chilling idea that too beautiful? Maybe a witch reveals a dark facet of medieval society's perception of beauty. When a woman's allure transcended the ordinary and seemed to defy natural explanation, it could trigger fear and lead to grave accusations. This phenomenon illustrates how societal anxieties, religious beliefs, and human envy could converge to transform an admired quality into a dangerous liability, making extreme beauty a perilous gift in an era defined by its deep-seated fears of the unknown and the supernatural. In medieval Europe, the concept of beauty extended far beyond the contours of the body itself. It was an intricately woven tapestry where fashion was the frame around the face. Clothing was not merely practical attire but a deliberate, sophisticated tool used to sculpt the silhouette, accentuate desired features, and strategically conceal perceived imperfections. For women, in particular, the right dress was an indispensable ally in the pursuit of the era's demanding beauty ideals, acting as a dynamic frame that highlighted what was adored and cleverly disguised what was undesired. The medieval silhouette, especially during the Gothic period, emphasized a long, lean line, often achieved through specific garment construction. Central to this was the use of tight bodices to shape their waists. Unlike earlier looser garments, the bodices of gowns became increasingly fitted, sometimes laced tightly or reinforced with stiffening materials like buckram or even whalebone, though whalebone corsets in the sense of the Victorian era were not yet common. Stiffening elements were certainly present. This created a dramatic contrast between a small, elevated waistline and the expansive skirts that flowed from it, enhancing the illusion of height and slender elegance. A tiny waist was a sign of youth, delicacy, and an aristocratic life free from physical labor. The discomfort of a tightly laced bodice was a small price to pay for achieving this idealized figure, demonstrating the pain for beauty ethos that permeated medieval aesthetics. This cinched waist then transitioned into flowing sleeves that dragged across stone floors. These voluminous, often trailing sleeves, known as pendant sleeves or houppelans, were highly impractical but immensely fashionable. Their extreme length and width served multiple purposes in the framing of beauty. Firstly, they emphasized the wearer's graceful movements, creating a dramatic sweep as she walked, drawing attention to her presence. Secondly, their sheer volume and the luxurious fabric they consumed were unmistakable signs of wealth. Fabric was expensive, and to have so much of it trailing on the ground was a clear display of opulence and a life that did not involve manual work. Thirdly, these elaborate sleeves helped to create a sense of ethereal delicacy around the arms and hands, further contributing to the overall image of a woman untouched by the realities of everyday toil. The very fact that they dragged across stone floors underscored the wearer's privileged status, someone who had servants to clean and maintain such elaborate garments, and who did not need to worry about practicality. The strategic use of necklines also played a crucial role in framing the face and highlighting other desired features. During different periods, necklines varied from high and modest to wide and scooped. A wide, low neckline, for instance, could emphasize a long, elegant neck and draw attention upwards to the face, particularly if worn with a high, often plucked, hairline. The contrast between the broad shoulders created by fitted sleeves and the slender neck rising from a wide neckline further enhanced the desired delicate silhouette. Beyond the specific garment elements, the choice of fabric itself was paramount. Rich, heavy materials like velvet, brocade, silk, and fine wool were not just comfortable. They draped beautifully, held their shape, and, crucially, reflected light in a way that enhanced the desired pallor of the skin. The sheen of silk or the deep pile of velvet would have provided a luxurious backdrop against which a pale face would appear even more luminous. The color of the fabric also played a role. Deep jewel tones like ruby red, sapphire blue, and emerald green were popular among the wealthy, as they often came from expensive dyes and provided a vibrant contrast to the desired fair complexion. The principle that the right dress could hide what was undesired and highlight what was adored was central to medieval fashion's function as a beauty tool. Hiding the undesired. While medieval beauty standards emphasized specific features, not every woman naturally possessed them. Clothing could be used to minimize perceived flaws. A woman with a less-than-slender waist could rely on the shaping of a bodice to create the illusion of a smaller middle. Garments with high collars or veils could conceal an aging neck. Voluminous sleeves could subtly hide arms that were not considered ideally delicate. The overall grandeur of the gown could distract from minor imperfections on the face or body, highlighting the adored. Conversely, fashion was expertly employed to draw attention to the most prized features. The high hairline was emphasized by the framing of elaborate headwear and the cut of the gown's neckline. The desired paleness of the face and hands was set off by the rich, dark colors of the fabric. Long, flowing lines created by the cut of the gown emphasized height and slenderness, which were highly admired. Delicate embroidery or jewels strategically placed at the neckline or sleeves could draw the eye towards the face and hands, which were also critical areas for beauty display. Headwear, though not strictly dress, was an extension of this framing concept. Elaborate headdresses, veils, and wimples not only signified modesty or marital status but also served to frame the face, often emphasizing the desired high forehead or the delicate features within. A wimple, for instance, could tightly frame the face, highlighting its oval shape and drawing attention to the eyes and mouth. In essence, medieval fashion was a sophisticated art form that worked in tandem with cosmetic practices to construct the ideal feminine aesthetic. It wasn't about individual items of clothing, but about the holistic effect created by the entire ensemble. The tight bodices, flowing sleeves, luxurious fabrics, and strategic necklines all collaborated to create a visual narrative of elegance, status, and refined beauty. For the medieval woman, her dress was truly the frame around her face, carefully designed to enhance her allure, mask her imperfections, and eloquently communicate her place in a society where appearance was inextricably linked to identity and worth. In medieval Europe, where beauty ideals championed a delicate balance of artifice and naturalism, the application of color to the face, particularly blush, was a nuanced affair. Blush from beets and candlelight perfectly encapsulates the ingenious, albeit rudimentary, methods women employed to achieve a subtle, ethereal glow. Lacking modern cosmetics, they turned to natural pigments like crushed berries or beet juice, aiming for a whisper of color that mimicked a natural blush by candlelight. This delicate touch was paramount, as anything too bold was considered improper or even sinful, reflecting a strict moral code that permeated even the realm of personal adornment. The primary goal of medieval blush was not to create a dramatic flush, but to imbue the highly prized pale complexion with a hint of warmth and vitality. An unnaturally vibrant or clown-like application would have undermined the ideal of a serene, unblemished face. The desired effect was a soft, almost translucent tint, suggesting a youthful glow that emanated from within, as if stimulated by a gentle warmth or a demure blush of modesty. With no commercially manufactured blushes available, women became resourceful chemists, turning to the bounty of nature for their pigments. Crushed berries were a readily available and common choice. Red berries such as strawberries, raspberries, or mulberries, when mashed, yielded a vibrant juice that could be carefully dabbed onto the cheeks. The challenge lay in controlling the intensity and ensuring an even application, as natural pigments can be inconsistent. The juice would be applied sparingly, often with a finger or a small piece of cloth, and then blended subtly into the skin. Beet juice was another popular and effective natural tint. Beets, being widely cultivated, provided a strong, natural red pigment. Slices of raw beet could be gently rubbed directly onto the cheeks, or the juice could be extracted and applied. Like berry juice, beet juice offered a natural-looking flush, though it too required careful handling to avoid an overly concentrated or streaky appearance. Other natural dyes, possibly from madder root or cochineal, an insect-derived red dye, might also have been used, though perhaps less commonly for direct facial application due to their intensity or expense. The specific phrase, "as if the skin blushed naturally by candlelight," points to the environmental context in which this beauty was primarily observed. Medieval interiors were dimly lit, often by candlelight, firelight, or small windows. In such subdued lighting, a subtle flush would have been more perceptible and flattering than a heavy application. The flickering, warm glow of candles would have lent an additional softness and naturalness to the tinted cheeks, making the subtle blush appear even more lifelike and ethereal. A bold, garish color, on the other hand, would have appeared jarring and artificial under such conditions. The strong moral implications attached to makeup in medieval society were a significant constraint on its application. Anything too bold was considered improper or even sinful, reflects the pervasive influence of religious doctrine on everyday life. Excessive adornment, especially that which drastically altered natural appearance, was often viewed with suspicion by the Church. It could be condemned as vanity, deceit, or an attempt to defy God's natural creation. Modesty and humility were highly valued virtues for women, and overt displays of artifice were seen as undermining these qualities. A woman who wore too much or too obvious blush might be accused of trying to deceive, to appear younger than her years, or to entice men with false appearances. Such practices could be linked to moral looseness or even, in more extreme interpretations, to witchcraft, as seen in the too beautiful? Maybe a witch sentiment, as excessive beauty was sometimes thought to be supernaturally enhanced. Therefore, the subtle application of blush was not just an aesthetic choice but a moral imperative, allowing a woman to enhance her beauty without crossing the line into perceived sinfulness or impropriety. The aim was to appear naturally vibrant, even if that naturalness was painstakingly achieved. This delicate balance between enhancement and naturalism highlights the nuanced approach to beauty in the Middle Ages. Women were expected to be beautiful, and to some extent, to actively cultivate that beauty. However, this cultivation had to remain within the bounds of what was considered modest and natural looking, at least to the casual observer. The natural blush was an ideal, and the use of subtle natural pigments was the preferred method to achieve it, ensuring that the desired glow appeared as if it truly emanated from within, rather than being painted on. In conclusion, the practice of creating blush from beets and candlelight reveals a fascinating interplay of limited resources, sophisticated aesthetic ideals, and strict moral codes in medieval Europe. Women ingeniously utilized natural pigments to achieve a subtle, natural-looking flush, perfectly suited for the dim light of medieval interiors. This delicate approach was not merely an aesthetic preference but a moral necessity, reflecting a societal disapproval of overt artifice and a preference for beauty that appeared to be naturally bestowed, even if painstakingly applied. In the hierarchical and visually coded society of medieval Europe, jewelry transcended mere ornamentation. It was a potent form of non-verbal communication. Jewelry was a quiet signal, perfectly encapsulates this reality, where gold, pearls, and precious stones weren't just adornments. They told silent stories of marriage, wealth, and family power. In a world where literacy was rare and social status was paramount, a piece of jewelry could convey volumes about the wearer's identity, connections, and standing, often dictating how someone was treated in a room. Thus, beauty, particularly for the elite, was inextricably linked with this shimmering display of status, adding a discernible sparkle even in the dimly lit, darkest halls of castles and cathedrals. The fundamental message conveyed by precious jewelry was wealth. Gold, being intrinsically valuable, and gemstones, being rare and often imported, represented concentrated forms of economic power. A nobleman or noblewoman adorned with a heavy gold chain, a ring set with a large sapphire, or a pearl-encrusted brooch was making an undeniable statement of their financial prowess. This display was crucial in a society without complex financial instruments. Visible wealth was a direct indicator of one's resources and ability to command respect and influence. The sheer cost of acquiring, crafting, and maintaining such pieces put them far beyond the reach of the common person, immediately differentiating the wearer as part of the elite. Beyond general wealth, jewelry was a profound indicator of family power and lineage. Many pieces of jewelry were heirlooms, passed down through generations. A signet ring bearing a family crest, a necklace gifted by a matriarch, or a brooch linked to a specific historical event within the family line, all served as tangible connections to a storied past. Wearing such pieces was a public declaration of one's noble ancestry and the enduring power of their kin. It cemented one's place within a powerful dynasty, often reminding onlookers of the family's landholdings, military might, and political influence. Such a piece of jewelry could indeed change how someone was treated in a room, granting them immediate deference and recognition among peers and subordinates alike. Perhaps one of the most significant silent stories told by jewelry was that of marriage and marital status. Wedding rings, though sometimes simpler than later elaborate engagement rings, were powerful symbols of commitment and legal union. More broadly, gifts of jewelry exchanged between spouses or given to a bride by her family were common. A woman adorned with a significant pearl necklace or an intricately designed brooch might be subtly communicating her married status, the wealth of her husband, or the generosity of her dowry. For a widow, the type of jewelry worn might subtly shift to reflect her new status, perhaps incorporating mourning symbols or demonstrating her continued wealth despite her husband's passing. These pieces were not just personal adornments. They were public declarations of a woman's place within the social fabric of her community. The materials themselves carried specific connotations. Gold symbolized purity, eternity, and divinity. Its unchangeable nature made it ideal for conveying lasting power and divine favor. Pearls, often associated with purity, modesty, and tears, were particularly favored by noble women, sometimes sewn onto garments in vast numbers to create a shimmering effect. They were also symbols of wealth given the difficulty of their acquisition. Precious stones like rubies, sapphires, and emeralds were not only beautiful but also believed to possess specific powers or virtues: protection, wisdom, health, or courage. Wearing these stones was thus believed to imbue the wearer with their qualities, adding another layer of meaning to their display. The rarity and geographical origin of certain stones also spoke of extensive trade networks and global connections, another subtle nod to wealth and influence. The placement and type of jewelry also sent specific signals. Large necklaces and pendants drew attention to the upper body, framing the face and emphasizing the wearer's stature. Rings, worn prominently on the fingers, allowed for close inspection and were often used to display family crests or symbols of alliance. Brooches were functional as garment fasteners but also served as miniature canvases for displaying intricate craftsmanship and precious gems. Even hairnets or circlets adorned with jewels could subtly indicate wealth and status, transforming the head into a crown of sorts. In the dimly lit interiors of medieval castles, churches, and feasting halls, the sparkle of gold and the glint of polished gems would have caught the light, drawing the eye and making the wearer stand out. This sparkle, even in the darkest halls, was not merely for aesthetic pleasure. It served a practical purpose in highlighting the presence of the elite. In a pre-electricity world, the reflective qualities of jewelry ensured that one's status was visible, even from a distance and in less than ideal lighting conditions. It was a constant, shimmering affirmation of one's identity and place. In conclusion, medieval jewelry was far more than mere decorative items. It was a sophisticated system of visual communication, a silent language understood by all. Every piece, from a simple gold ring to an elaborate pearl necklace, narrated stories of marriage, wealth, and family power. This constant, sparkling display of status profoundly influenced social interactions, dictating how someone was treated in a room, and serving as an enduring symbol of beauty intertwined with privilege in the often dark and challenging world of the Middle Ages. In medieval Europe, the concept of feminine beauty extended far beyond physical attributes, encompassing a strict code of conduct that prioritized restraint and demureness. Silence was beautiful perfectly encapsulates this ideal, where loud laughter or too much talking was frowned upon in women. The epitome of the ideal lady was characterized by an inner and outer tranquility. She was graceful, quiet, and controlled. This meant that beauty wasn't just a visual spectacle. It was expressed in the subtlest of gestures: how softly you moved, how gently you looked down, how little you said. This emphasis on silence and restraint for women was deeply rooted in the social, religious, and philosophical norms of the Middle Ages. Women were often expected to embody virtues such as modesty, humility, piety, and obedience. Loudness, boisterousness, or excessive chatter were seen as antithetical to these qualities, often associated with a lack of self-control, vulgarity, or even loose morals. A woman who spoke too much or too loudly risked being perceived as imprudent, gossipy, or immodest, potentially damaging her reputation and that of her family. Graceful movement was a cornerstone of this controlled beauty. A lady was expected to glide rather than stride, to perform her duties with a gentle fluidity. This meant carefully cultivated posture, soft steps, and measured gestures. Such movements conveyed an air of refinement and leisure, contrasting sharply with the hurried, often clumsy motions of those engaged in manual labor. The rustle of her rich garments, rather than the clatter of her steps, might be the only sound she made as she traversed a hall. This grace was not just aesthetic. It implied a well-disciplined body and mind, a reflection of inner harmony and good breeding. The way a woman carried her gaze was also highly scrutinized. How gently you looked down speaks to the ideal of a modest and submissive demeanor. Direct, prolonged eye contact, especially with men, could be seen as challenging, overly bold, or even flirtatious. A downcast gaze, lifted only occasionally and demurely, conveyed humility, respect, and a lack of inappropriate interest. It protected her reputation and affirmed her adherence to societal expectations of female propriety. This subtle control of the eyes was a powerful nonverbal cue, contributing significantly to her perceived beauty and virtue. Above all, the emphasis was on how little you said. A woman of beauty and virtue was not expected to dominate conversations or express strong, unsolicited opinions in public settings. Her speech, when necessary, was to be soft, measured, and purposeful. She spoke only when spoken to, or when absolutely required, and her words were chosen with care to be polite, agreeable, and non-controversial. Silence was equated with thoughtfulness, wisdom, and a respectful understanding of her place in the social hierarchy. It suggested that she was a good listener, capable of absorbing knowledge without needing to constantly assert herself verbally. This ideal of a silent and controlled woman was reinforced through various cultural channels. Religious texts often praised female saints and figures for their quiet devotion and humble demeanor. Courtly literature, while celebrating eloquent expression in men, frequently depicted the ideal lady as one of quiet elegance, whose allure lay in her mystique and serene presence. Conduct books, which proliferated during the later Middle Ages, offered explicit instructions to noblewomen on how to behave, often emphasizing the virtues of silence and restraint in speech and movement. This ideal of a silent and controlled woman was reinforced through various cultural channels. Religious texts often praised female saints and figures for their quiet devotion and humble demeanor. Courtly literature, while celebrating eloquent expression in men, frequently depicted the ideal lady as one of quiet elegance, whose allure lay in her mystique and serene presence. Conduct books, which proliferated during the later Middle Ages, offered explicit instructions to noblewomen on how to behave, often emphasizing the virtues of silence and restraint in speech and movement. The implications of this ideal were profound. For women, it meant a constant vigilance over their natural impulses for expressiveness. Laughter, a spontaneous human emotion, had to be carefully managed, reduced to a gentle titter or suppressed entirely if it became too boisterous. Conversation was a minefield, requiring careful navigation to avoid appearing too forward or opinionated. This could lead to a sense of repression or an internal pressure to conform, potentially stifling individual personality in favor of an idealized, almost performance-based presentation of self. However, for those who mastered this art of quiet beauty, the rewards were significant. A woman who embodied grace, control, and measured silence was highly admired, respected, and considered suitable for marriage into prestigious families. These qualities were seen as evidence of good upbringing, inner virtue, and a harmonious temperament, making her an ideal wife and mistress of a household. In conclusion, silence was beautiful was a pervasive and powerful tenet of medieval feminine beauty standards. It went beyond mere physical appearance, encompassing a comprehensive code of conduct that valued grace, quietude, and rigorous self-control. A woman's beauty was not just in her features, but in how softly she moved, how gently she looked down, and how little she spoke. This ideal, deeply embedded in social and religious expectations, shaped the very essence of feminine presentation, making quiet restraint a defining and highly sought-after aspect of medieval female allure. In medieval Europe, the human face was far more than a mere canvas for beauty or a display of social status. It was believed to be a direct window into the very essence of a person's being. Your face could predict your soul, encapsulates the pervasive belief in physiognomy, an ancient and deeply influential pseudoscience that held that a person's external physical characteristics, particularly their face shape and features, revealed their inner character, moral virtues, and even their destiny. In this worldview, beauty and morality were deeply connected, at least in people's minds, making the assessment of facial features a serious and often judgmental practice. Physiognomy was not a fringe belief but a widely accepted concept, rooted in classical Greek and Roman philosophy, notably Aristotle and later, figures like Pseudo-Aristotle, and further developed during the Middle Ages. Treatises on physiognomy were popular and influential, advising people on how to interpret facial cues. The underlying premise was a belief in a harmonious relationship between the microcosm, the human body, and the macrocosm, the universe, and between the inner spirit and the outer form. God, it was thought, would not create a beautiful soul within an ugly form, nor a wicked soul within a truly angelic face, though exceptions and deceptions were always acknowledged to account for human imperfection and the devil's wiles. Specific facial features were meticulously catalogued and assigned corresponding character traits. A pointed nose meant cleverness. This wasn't merely a neutral observation, but an attribution of intellectual sharpness, wit, and perhaps even cunning. A finely sculpted, acute nose might suggest a quick mind, someone who could discern details and navigate complex situations. Conversely, a broad or flat nose might be associated with dullness or a more brutish nature. A rounded chin showed kindness. A soft, gently curved chin was linked to benevolence, a compassionate disposition, and a good heart. It suggested approachability, a gentle spirit, and trustworthiness. In contrast, a sharp, angular chin might be seen as indicative of aggression, stubbornness, or even malice. Other features also carried significant weight. Large, bright eyes were often associated with intelligence, honesty, and a clear soul, while small, deep-set eyes might suggest suspicion or avarice. High, broad foreheads, already linked to nobility and intelligence in beauty standards, further reinforced concepts of wisdom and intellectual capacity. Thin lips could imply meanness or deceit, while fuller, well-shaped lips might suggest generosity and warmth. Even the texture and color of the skin played a role, with excessively ruddy complexions sometimes linked to choleric temperaments or excessive indulgence, and extreme pallor, unless consciously cultivated by the elite, potentially signaling illness or a weak constitution. The implication was that true, innate beauty was inseparable from inner virtue. A woman who was deemed genuinely beautiful in the medieval sense was not just aesthetically pleasing. Her facial harmony was believed to reflect a pure heart, a gentle spirit, and a virtuous soul. This created a powerful feedback loop. If a woman adhered to the prevailing beauty standards, pale skin, high forehead, thin brows, she was not only considered physically attractive but also implicitly understood to possess desirable moral qualities. Her external beauty served as a visible testament to her internal goodness. Conversely, individuals whose features deviated significantly from the idealized physiognomic norms faced a double bind. If their face was deemed ugly, or possessed features associated with negative traits, e.g., a large, crooked nose, a receding chin, overly close-set eyes, they were not only considered physically unattractive but were also subtly, or even explicitly, judged as possessing a flawed or wicked character. This could lead to social ostracization, distrust, and prejudice, making life incredibly difficult for those whose natural appearance did not align with the perceived markers of virtue. This connection between beauty and morality was especially poignant for women. As custodians of virtue and symbols of purity, their physical appearance was often read as a direct reflection of their spiritual state. A truly beautiful woman was seen as a reflection of God's grace, while a woman deemed ugly or possessing unfortunate features might face questions about her moral standing or even be subject to accusations of witchcraft if her appearance was deemed unsettling or malevolent, as seen in the too beautiful, maybe a witch context, where unnatural beauty could also be feared. The pervasive belief in physiognomy meant that people actively scrutinized faces, consciously or unconsciously interpreting features as signs. It influenced arranged marriages, judicial proceedings, where a person's look could sway judgment, and general social interactions. While it lacked any scientific basis, its psychological impact was profound, shaping perceptions, prejudices, and the very definition of what it meant to be beautiful in both body and soul. In conclusion, your face could predict your soul was a deeply held and influential belief in medieval Europe. Physiognomy, the idea that external features revealed inner character, meant that beauty and morality were inextricably linked in the public imagination. A pointed nose, a rounded chin, and other specific features were not just aesthetic details but silent declarations of cleverness, kindness, or other virtues. This worldview transformed the human face into a complex map of the soul, ensuring that how one looked had profound implications for how one was judged and treated in a society where inner goodness was expected to manifest in outward form. In medieval Europe, the concept of beauty diverged significantly from modern ideals, embracing an aesthetic that prioritized control, pallor, and an absence of overt emotion. Unlike today's emphasis on natural looks, the medieval woman's face was indeed a canvas, meticulously crafted to conform to societal expectations. This wasn't merely a preference but a deeply ingrained cultural mandate, where specific features like a high forehead, thinly plucked or even shaved brows, and an almost translucent complexion were not considered optional but essential markers of feminine allure. This comprehensive manipulation of the face transformed it into a deliberate statement of status, virtue, and adherence to societal norms. The high forehead, for instance, was a highly coveted attribute. This wasn't a natural anatomical feature for most, and women went to considerable lengths to achieve it. Hairlines were often plucked, shaved, or chemically treated to recede, creating the illusion of a broader, more expansive forehead. This practice was rooted in the belief that a large forehead conveyed intelligence, nobility, and an aristocratic lineage. It also allowed for a clearer view of the delicate veins beneath the skin, further enhancing the desired paleness. The hair itself, if not hidden under veils or elaborate head coverings like the henna or wimple, was often styled to accentuate this elevated hairline, sometimes braided and coiled on top of the head or pinned back tightly. This deliberate manipulation of the hairline served to frame the face in a way that emphasized the smoothness and unblemished quality of the skin, which was another cornerstone of medieval beauty. The act of plucking or shaving the hairline was itself a form of pain for beauty, signifying a woman's dedication to this ideal. Complementing the high forehead were the thin or entirely absent eyebrows. Again, this was a departure from natural growth patterns. Women meticulously plucked, shaved, or even bleached their eyebrows to achieve a barely there appearance. The reasoning behind this seemingly stark aesthetic choice was multifaceted. Firstly, it contributed to the overall impression of a smooth, uninterrupted canvas of the face. Bold or bushy eyebrows would have been seen as detracting from this ideal, suggesting a lack of refinement or even a rustic disposition. Secondly, the lack of prominent eyebrows further accentuated the paleness of the complexion and drew attention to the eyes, which were often considered windows to the soul. A faint, almost invisible brow line created an ethereal, almost otherworldly quality, aligning with the prevalent religious and spiritual undertones of the era. The extreme nature of this practice, sometimes even involving the use of mouse fur for artificial brows, highlights the lengths to which women would go to achieve the desired effect. This deliberate suppression of natural brow growth reinforced the notion of a woman's control over her physical appearance, a visible manifestation of inner discipline and refinement. Perhaps the most defining characteristic of medieval beauty was porcelain skin. A pale complexion was not just admired, it was practically a prerequisite. This ideal was deeply intertwined with social status. Sun-kissed skin was associated with outdoor labor and the peasantry, while a pristine, unblemished pallor signified a life of leisure, indoor pursuits, and an aristocratic lifestyle. Women went to great lengths to achieve and maintain this alabaster complexion. They avoided the sun at all costs, often wearing wide-brimmed hats, veils, and gloves even indoors. Cosmetics, though rudimentary by modern standards, were employed to enhance paleness. Lead-based paints and powders, like Venetian ceruse, were common, despite their toxic properties, alongside flour, egg whites, and even ground pearls, all aimed at creating a flawless, almost unnaturally white surface. This emphasis on pallor also contributed to the overall impression of fragility and delicacy, qualities highly valued in medieval womanhood, directly linking beauty to perceived wealth and gentility. The tragic irony of deadly makeup was a hidden cost of this aesthetic. Beyond individual features, the overall aesthetic aimed for an emotionless demeanor. A serene, composed, and somewhat impassive expression was considered the epitome of beauty. Loud laughter was often seen as unladylike, and overt displays of emotion were generally discouraged. This wasn't about suppressing genuine feelings, but about presenting a controlled and dignified outward appearance. The lack of strong facial expressions further contributed to the canvas effect, allowing the carefully constructed features to take center stage without the disruption of shifting emotions. This controlled presentation was also linked to societal expectations of female piety and humility, where a placid demeanor reflected an inner spiritual calm. Indeed, silence was beautiful, and a woman's graceful, quiet, and controlled movements, coupled with a demure gaze, were as much a part of her beauty as her physical features. In essence, medieval beauty was a performative art. It was not about enhancing natural attributes, but about transforming the face into a stylized representation of ideal womanhood. Each element, the high forehead, the thin brows, the porcelain skin, and the serene expression, contributed to a cohesive vision of beauty that was highly artificial, yet deeply meaningful within its cultural context. This controlled beauty reflected a society that valued order, hierarchy, and the subjugation of raw nature to cultivated ideals, projecting an image of refinement, status, and virtue onto the very face of its women. The medieval woman's face, therefore, was not merely a biological feature but a meticulously crafted work of art, a testament to the prevailing aesthetic and social values of the era. Even beyond the face, fashion was the frame around the face, with tight bodices, flowing sleeves, and rich fabrics all contributing to the overall sculpted ideal, highlighting desired attributes and hiding perceived flaws. This comprehensive approach to beauty made the medieval female face a true testament to the era's unique and demanding aesthetic standards. In medieval Europe, the pursuit of beauty was not merely a matter of public display or widely known customs. It was also a clandestine art, often preserved and transmitted through informal, almost secret channels. Books secretly taught beauty tricks vividly illustrates this practice, where beneath the solemnity of religious doctrines or the practicalities of medical texts, there were often handwritten notes, tips passed down between women. These hidden instructions contained a wealth of knowledge, recipes for skin creams, homemade perfumes, and even charms believed to protect a woman's looks from aging or envy. This quiet tradition reveals a fascinating interplay of practical knowledge, folk wisdom, and magical thinking in the intimate realm of feminine self-care. The very notion of secretly teaching these tricks points to the dual nature of beauty in the medieval period. While an idealized appearance was highly valued and a marker of status, the overt display of artifice was often frowned upon, even condemned as vain or sinful by moral authorities. Women were caught in a paradox, expected to be beautiful, yet implicitly discouraged from appearing to put too much effort into it. Therefore, the knowledge of how to achieve certain effects, especially through tricks, became a private matter, shared within trusted female networks. Mothers to daughters, sisters, close friends, or perhaps ladies' maids. These handwritten notes, often found scrawled in the margins of larger, more official tomes, or in small, personal commonplace books, served as invaluable repositories of practical cosmetic knowledge. They were a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of medieval women who, lacking commercial beauty products and scientific understanding, relied on observation and experimentation with natural ingredients. Recipes for skin creams were a cornerstone of these hidden beauty regimens. Given the medieval ideal of pale, unblemished skin, women sought ways to moisturize, lighten, and soothe their complexions. These recipes would involve a variety of natural ingredients. Animal fats, like lard or suet, or vegetable oils, like olive or almond oil, formed the base, providing emollient properties. Waxes, like beeswax, would be added to give the creams texture and stability. Herbs known for their skin benefits were often infused into these bases. For instance, lavender for softness, rose petals for fragrance and supposed toning, or chamomile for soothing irritation. Other ingredients like egg whites for tightening, honey for healing blemishes and moisturizing, or even finely ground grains might be incorporated for specific effects. The methods would be simple: warming ingredients, mixing them, and allowing them to cool into a salve. Homemade perfumes were equally vital, particularly in an era where bathing was rare. These notes would contain instructions for concocting aromatic blends to mask body odors and leave a pleasant scent. Rosewater was a ubiquitous ingredient, distilled from rose petals, and used as a base or an additive. Aromatic herbs such as rosemary, mint, sage, and lavender were commonly infused in alcohol, like wine or spirits, or oils to extract their fragrances. Spices like cloves, cinnamon, or nutmeg, though expensive, might be included for richer, more exotic scents, sometimes ground and mixed into powders that could be dusted onto clothes or hair. Animal-derived scents like musk or ambergris, when available to the very wealthy, were also highly prized for their lasting power and depth, and recipes might describe how to incorporate tiny amounts. These perfumes would be applied to the skin, hair, clothing, or placed in small sachets or pomanders worn on the person. Beyond practical recipes, these hidden notes often delved into the realm of charms believed to protect a woman's looks from aging or envy. This reveals the strong presence of folk magic and superstitious beliefs intertwined with everyday life. In a world where the vagaries of fate seemed inexplicable, and where a woman's beauty was a crucial social currency, it was natural to seek supernatural protection for this valuable asset. Protection from aging. Charms might involve specific rituals performed at certain times, e.g., during a new moon, the recitation of verses, or the use of specific objects, like amulets made from certain stones or herbs, believed to ward off wrinkles or preserve youthful vitality. Protection from envy. Given that excessive beauty could even lead to accusations of witchcraft, safeguarding against the evil eye or the malice of jealous rivals was a genuine concern. Charms against envy might involve carrying specific protective herbs, wearing certain types of jewelry, like coral or jet, believed to deflect negative energy, or performing small, private rituals to deflect ill will. These charms were not necessarily about transforming appearance but about preserving it from external threats, both natural and supernatural. The nature of these secret books also highlights the limitations of formal education for women during this period. While some aristocratic women were highly educated, access to broader knowledge, especially practical domestic arts and beauty lore, was often passed down informally, ensuring that such knowledge remained within the female domain and often outside the direct purview of male authority or religious scrutiny. This informal transmission allowed for experimentation and adaptation, making these notes a living testament to generations of women's collective wisdom regarding self-care. In conclusion, Books Secretly Taught Beauty Tricks paints a vivid picture of a covert world of medieval feminine beauty. Hidden within more conventional texts were precious handwritten notes containing practical recipes for skin creams and homemade perfumes, alongside charms believed to protect looks from aging or envy. This quiet, informal tradition underscores the resourcefulness of medieval women, their deep connection to natural remedies, and the complex interplay between aesthetic ideals, practical knowledge, and superstitious beliefs in shaping their daily lives and their pursuit of beauty. These hidden pages were truly the clandestine guides to medieval allure, passed down whispers and wisdom from one woman to another. In medieval and early modern Europe, long before the advent of photography or digital manipulation, the art of portraiture served as a powerful medium for constructing and preserving idealized notions of beauty. Paintings Preserved the Ideal encapsulates this practice, where portraits of noblewomen were rarely faithful reproductions of reality. Instead, they were meticulously enhanced. Artists, acting as early image consultants, would smooth out wrinkles, brighten skin, and sometimes even changed facial features to align with the prevailing beauty standards of the era. The ideal woman was, therefore, an artistic creation meticulously crafted with brush and pigment, centuries before Photoshop. The primary purpose of a medieval or early modern portrait, especially of a noblewoman, was not strictly realism as we understand it today. While a recognizable likeness was important, the paramount goal was to present the sitter in the best possible light, emphasizing their status, virtue, and adherence to the era's beauty ideals. These paintings were often commissioned for political alliances, marriage proposals, or to establish family legacies, making the portrayal of an ideal figure crucial for projecting power and desirability. Artists were not merely observers. They were collaborators in constructing this ideal. They understood the prevailing beauty standards and would subtly, or sometimes overtly, manipulate the image to conform. Smoothing out wrinkles was a common practice. In an era where youthful, unblemished skin was highly prized, linked to purity, health, and fertility, Any signs of aging, such as wrinkles, fine lines, or sagging skin, were carefully minimized or entirely erased. This wasn't seen as deception but as an artistic convention, presenting the sitter in her most favorable, timeless aspect. It served to prolong the illusion of youth and vitality, qualities particularly valued in prospective brides or matriarchs. Brightening skin was another key enhancement. As discussed previously, pale, porcelain skin was the ultimate marker of aristocratic status and leisure. Artists would often exaggerate this paleness, rendering complexions with an almost luminous, translucent quality, even if the sitter's natural complexion was less extreme. They would use pigments to create a flawless, milky surface, sometimes subtly indicating delicate blue veins beneath the skin to further emphasize its transparency and fragility. This artistic choice reinforced the social message that the woman was unexposed to the sun and manual labor, living a life of comfort and refinement. Changing facial features was perhaps the most audacious manipulation. If a sitter's natural features didn't quite align with the ideal, artists were expected to make adjustments. For instance, if a woman's forehead was naturally low, the artist might subtly extend it upwards to create the coveted high forehead. Eyebrows might be thinned, arched more delicately, or even rendered almost invisible, regardless of their natural state. Noses might be refined to appear more slender or aristocratic. Chins might be gently rounded or sharpened to match physiognomic ideals of kindness or intelligence. These alterations ensured that the painted image presented a perfectly harmonious face according to the aesthetic doctrines of the time, even if it meant diverging from strict photographic accuracy. The creation of the ideal woman with brush and pigment was also influenced by the limited visual feedback available to people. As mirrors were a luxury, most individuals, including noblewomen, did not have constant, clear access to their own reflections. Thus, their painted portraits often became the definitive visual record of their appearance, not just for others but for themselves. These paintings shaped not only public perception but also the sitter's own self-image, becoming the aspirational truth of their beauty. Furthermore, the style of painting itself contributed to this idealization. Artists often employed soft lighting, delicate brushstrokes, and meticulous attention to detail to create a sense of serenity and timelessness. The women in these portraits often held a controlled, emotionless demeanor, reflecting the societal expectation that noblewomen should be poised, modest, and composed. This calm expression, coupled with the enhanced features, projected an image of inner virtue and outer perfection. The longevity of these paintings meant that they literally preserved the ideal for centuries. They served as visual templates for what constituted beauty, influencing subsequent generations of artists and sitters. Long before the widespread dissemination of images through mass media, these portraits were the primary means by which beauty standards were communicated and reinforced across time and geography. In conclusion, the practice that paintings preserved the ideal in medieval and early modern Europe highlights the powerful role of art in shaping societal perceptions of beauty. Far from mere factual representations, portraits of noblewomen were sophisticated exercises in idealization. Artists meticulously smoothed out wrinkles, brightened skin, and often subtly, or not so subtly, changed facial features, all to create a vision of the ideal woman that adhered to the prevailing aesthetic and moral standards. This centuries-old tradition of artistic enhancement demonstrates that the desire to present a perfected image is not a modern phenomenon, but a timeless pursuit, perfected with brush and pigment long before the digital age of Photoshop. In medieval Europe, as in many societies across history, youth was unequivocally the zenith of beauty. The adage "youth was everything" captures this fundamental truth, reflecting a societal preoccupation with a vibrant vitality and unblemished appearance associated with young women. This ideal permeated every aspect of beauty practices, from cosmetic concealment to sartorial choices, fundamentally altering how women were perceived as they aged. Wrinkles were hidden under powders, and hair was styled to look soft and innocent. The stark reality was that older women, especially widows, often wore black, not just for mourning, but because they were no longer seen as desirable, essentially disappearing from the aesthetic landscape of youthful allure. The preference for youth stemmed from a confluence of practical, social, and cultural factors. Youth signified fertility, essential for lineage and procreation, which was paramount in an era of high infant mortality. It implied health and vigor, critical for managing a household and bearing children. Furthermore, a youthful appearance was often associated with purity, innocence, and potential, aligning with the virtuous image expected of women. A smooth, unlined face, bright eyes, and a fresh complexion were seen as natural indicators of these desirable qualities. Given this intense valuation of youth, women went to considerable lengths to conceal the inevitable signs of aging. Wrinkles were hidden under powders, a practice that underscores the medieval woman's resourcefulness in the absence of modern anti-aging treatments. The same lead-based white powders used to achieve porcelain skin were also heavily applied to fill in and obscure lines on the face. While this created a smooth, mask-like surface, it also came with the dire consequences of lead poisoning, ironically accelerating the very aging process they sought to hide through skin damage and discoloration in the long term. Beyond powders, various natural concoctions, possibly including egg whites, flour, or herbal pastes, might have been used as temporary skin-tightening masks to give a more youthful appearance. The constant vigilance against wrinkles highlights the societal pressure to maintain a youthful facade as long as possible. Hair was styled to look soft and innocent, further contributing to the youthful ideal. While medieval hairstyles varied across centuries, those associated with younger, unmarried women often involved long, flowing, or simply braided hair, unadorned or subtly embellished. This contrasted with the more elaborate and restrictive head coverings worn by married or older women, which, while also serving as symbols of status and modesty, often obscured the hair. Softness in hair implied health and a lack of harsh treatments, aligning with innocence. The use of natural rinses and oils, like rosemary for luster, aimed to keep hair looking healthy and vibrant, characteristics of youth. For older women or those beginning to gray, hair dyes, often derived from plants like walnuts or gallnuts, might have been used to conceal graying, desperately clinging to the visual markers of youth. The fate of older women, especially widows, often starkly illustrated the societal shift in beauty perception. While wisdom and experience were respected in elders, their physical desirability, particularly in a marital context, was largely diminished. The phrase that they often wore black, not just for mourning, but because they were no longer seen as desirable, reveals a poignant truth. The fate of older women, especially widows, often starkly illustrated the societal shift in beauty perception. While wisdom and experience were respected in elders, their physical desirability, particularly in a marital context, was largely diminished. The phrase that they often wore black, not just for mourning, but because they were no longer seen as desirable, reveals a poignant truth. Black was the color of mourning, signifying loss and withdrawal from the vibrant social sphere of courtship. However, it also served a secondary, symbolic purpose. It visually muted the wearer, rendering them less conspicuous in a society that fetishized youth and bright colors for those in their prime. By donning black, widows effectively signaled their removal from the marriage market and their transition into a different social role, one not centered on physical allure. This shift in perception meant that while older women might retain respect for their wisdom, piety, or familial power, their physical beauty was largely considered to have faded. They were no longer objects of romantic or sexual desire in the same way younger women were. Their role transitioned to that of matriarchs, caregivers, or religious figures, where their virtue and experience outweighed any lingering physical appeal. This societal understanding was deeply ingrained, affecting how older women presented themselves and how they were viewed by others. In conclusion, youth was everything, was a dominant and often unforgiving beauty standard in medieval Europe. Women engaged in diligent cosmetic practices, using powders to hide wrinkles and styling hair to appear soft and innocent, all in a relentless pursuit of a youthful facade. The stark reality for older women, particularly widows, was that their perceived desirability waned with age, often signified by their adoption of black attire. This profound emphasis on youth shaped not only medieval beauty regimens but also the social roles and visual representation of women across their lifespans, highlighting a society where physical vitality was inextricably linked to perceived worth and allure. In medieval Europe, The profound connection between beauty, status, and the human spirit extended even beyond the threshold of life. Even in death, beauty was preserved encapsulates a poignant practice among wealthy families, the meticulous preparation of deceased women for burial, ensuring they presented an idealized image of serenity and virtue in their final repose. For these aristocratic women, death was not merely the end of life but a final, significant performance of their earthly identity. Their bodies were treated with reverence, dressed in their finest clothes and makeup, their hair was styled, lips tinted, and jewelry carefully placed. Even in death, beauty was seen as a reflection of virtue, pride, and peace, a final, poignant statement to the living and, implicitly, to the divine. This elaborate care for the deceased stemmed from several deeply held medieval beliefs and social customs. Firstly, there was a strong conviction that the body, as a vessel for the soul, held significant spiritual importance. Preparing it with dignity and beauty for burial was an act of respect for the departed and a reflection of hope for their resurrection. A serene and beautiful presentation in death was seen as a sign of a peaceful passage into the afterlife and a virtuous life lived. For wealthy families, the practice was also a powerful display of virtue and pride. A meticulous burial, adorned with fine clothes and subtle makeup, was a public affirmation of the family's piety, their enduring love for the deceased, and their continued prosperity. It demonstrated that even in loss, they maintained their high standards and spared no expense in honoring their own. The deceased's beautiful appearance in death served as a lasting testament to her elevated social standing and the family's commitment to upholding their honor. It was a final, grand statement of their enduring legacy. The details of this post-mortem beautification were painstaking. Dressed in their finest clothes, the deceased woman would be clad in her most exquisite garments, often silks, velvets, or brocades, sometimes even her wedding dress or a gown specifically made for burial. These clothes were not just for display, they were symbolic of her earthly status and a form of reverence. The texture and richness of the fabric would have provided a final, luxurious frame for her body, even in the coffin. Makeup applied. Despite the cessation of life, the medieval aesthetic of pale, unblemished skin and a subtle blush was often recreated. Lips were tinted with natural pigments like beet juice or berry extracts, aiming for a soft, lifelike hue that counteracted the pallor of death. Powders, likely non-toxic, as absorption was no longer a concern, might have been applied to the face to create a smooth, porcelain-like complexion, concealing any post-mortem discoloration. The goal was not to make the deceased look alive, but to make her look serene, beautiful, and at peace. Hair was styled. The deceased's hair, so crucial to living beauty standards, was also meticulously prepared. It might be carefully combed, braided, or arranged around the head, perhaps adorned with ribbons or a simple circlet, reflecting her status and youth if applicable. This attention to hair underscored its importance as a symbol of feminine grace and purity. Jewelry carefully placed. As jewelry was a quiet signal of wealth, marriage, and family power in life, it retained its significance in death. Rings, especially wedding rings, necklaces, brooches, or even small amulets might be carefully placed on the body or within the coffin. These pieces were not just adornments but symbols of her identity and connections, accompanying her on her final journey. While some valuable pieces might be kept by the family as heirlooms, it was common for at least some significant jewelry to be buried with the deceased, representing her enduring status and the family's willingness to make a final, lavish offering. The emphasis on peace in death was paramount. A beautiful, serene appearance conveyed the idea that the deceased had found spiritual tranquility. The soft tint of the lips, the smoothed complexion, and the graceful arrangement of hair and clothing all contributed to an image of calm repose, offering solace to the grieving family and affirming their belief in a peaceful transition to the afterlife. This beauty in death was a final visual prayer for the soul's salvation and a demonstration of earthly reverence. This practice also highlighted the medieval understanding of the body as an integral part of the person, even after death. The care taken reflected a society that did not sharply delineate between the physical and the spiritual in matters of identity and dignity. For a noblewoman, her status was inscribed on her body in life, and this inscription was maintained, even enhanced, in death. In conclusion, The meticulous beautification of deceased women from wealthy families in medieval Europe underscores a profound cultural belief that, even in death, beauty was preserved. Dressing them in their finest clothes, applying subtle makeup, styling their hair, and carefully placing jewelry were not just acts of mourning but potent symbols. They were final declarations of virtue, family pride, and a desired state of peace for the departed, ensuring that even in the stillness of death, the ideal of feminine beauty continued to resonate as a powerful reflection of their earthly identity and their journey towards eternal repose.